Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the government and political correspondent, and today our special guest is U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin, who's running for re-election here in 2024. Welcome to the show, Senator.
Thank you for having me. It's a delight to join you.
Well, as we were talking off air just before we started, we're starting this broadcast from Hudson, Wisconsin. We get replayed in different markets in Western Wisconsin, but it's an area that's hit more with Minnesota media than Wisconsin. So we really appreciate you being willing to give your time. Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to join for that very reason, to have an opportunity to interact with the people of Western Wisconsin. And, not only does it affect people's ability to get local news when they're in the Minnesota media market, but it also interferes sometimes with their getting their Packer games. And that is a crisis if you're from Wisconsin and a proud Packer fan.
I bet your office has gotten a few phone calls on that subject.
I actually have a bill, the Go Pack Go Act, which would require broadcasters who serve people in different states to offer a local broadcast so that they could get Wisconsin news from one of the Western Wisconsin media markets. And so the cable providers and the satellite providers would be forced to give you a choice, but it hasn't passed yet. We're still working on that act.
Well, good luck with that. Now, that may not have been the issue I wanted to lead off with, but that's certainly where the conversation goes, and that's the way these interviews go sometimes. So let's just briefly, though, talk a little bit about your background. You've been a U.S. Senator for 2 terms, 12 years, but tell the folks a little bit about your life of public service before that.
Yeah, well, before I got in public service, I was born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. But my story is not exactly like everyone else's family. My mother was 19 when I was born. She was going through a divorce, and throughout her life, she struggled with mental illness, physical illness, chronic pain, and then she struggled with addiction to the pain pills that she was prescribed by her doctors. When I was 2 months old, she moved back in with her parents, and it was my grandparents who raised me. And I was very fortunate to have their stability and their love. I also had a childhood illness of my own when I was 9 years old. It was very similar to spinal meningitis. That wasn't the exact diagnosis, but I was hospitalized for 3 months. And my grandparents had health insurance, but they learned in my time of need that it didn't cover grandchildren. I wasn't a legal dependent of theirs. And all of that in my background, watching my mother struggle to get the healthcare she needed, watching my grandparents worry that having an uninsured grandchild, what would happen if I were seriously ill or injured. And they tried to get me coverage, but back then the insurance companies could say no. And they did if you had a pre-existing condition. All of that gave me the fire in the belly to want to get into public life, to want to fix a broken healthcare system. And I've had the honor of being able to work on that topic and many, many others ever since I first ran for local office. My journey took me from the Dane County Board of Supervisors, where I was elected at age 24, all the way to the United States Senate when I was first elected in the year 2012. And probably one of the biggest themes of my public service has been working to fix our broken healthcare system. And the Affordable Care Act was something that I played a large role in helping to craft when I was in the House of Representatives. I sat on a panel that wrote part of the Affordable Care Act, and it was actually my amendment that allows young people to stay on their parents' health insurance until they turn 26, providing for the first time healthcare options for an age demographic that was prior to that largely uninsured. And much more recently, we've worked to lower the cost of prescription drugs by having Medicare negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies, much like they do in every other industrialized country. And those prices are coming down. And there's been some very specific battles, particularly with the manufacturers of asthma inhalers, where we have had huge victories in lowering the price for people who need those inhalers. So that gives you a sense of sort of where the fire in the belly came to want to run for public office. Healthcare is only one issue that I work on, but there's still a lot of work to be done in that arena so that everyone in America can have access to affordable, high quality healthcare.
And you mentioned how you were in Congress at the time, Affordable Care Act, but now in the 12 years in the Senate, you've actually worked on different amendments to try and make it stronger. Is that true?
Absolutely, especially during the pandemic, when it was so important that people had healthcare coverage, just in case, we were able to allow greater subsidies basically for people who were low income or lost their jobs because of the pandemic, so that they could keep and maintain their health care. And new enrollees could be added. And we've been able to keep those prices down through even as we emerge from the pandemic. But we'll have more work to do beyond that. And then obviously in the Inflation Reduction Act, the mandate now that Medicare negotiate with the big pharmaceutical companies to lower the price of needed prescription drugs, things that treat cancer, diabetes, and heart conditions. And we're going to continue that work. We need to not just have a few drugs that have been negotiated, but we need to continue that work so that people's healthcare is affordable and that they can afford the medicines that they need to stay healthy.
And you mentioned the asthma medication, the inhaler,
Yes.
also diabetes. Insulin is also something that has come down.
Yes, in the Inflation Reduction Act, we were able to cap the price of insulin for seniors on Medicare to no more than $35 per month out of pocket. And we are trying very hard, hopefully before the end of the year, to bring down the costs for insulin for everyone else who's not on Medicare. So there's no more than $35 a month out of pocket. And as I was just hinting at, we had that same breakthrough with the asthma inhalers. I launched an investigation along with several of my colleagues on the health panel that I sit on into the four major manufacturers of asthma inhalers. They set the list price, and in America, that list price is between $200 and $650 per inhaler. And somebody who has asthma needs a daily inhaler plus an emergency inhaler. In Europe, the same inhalers cost between $5 and $75. It's outrageous, the difference. And so our investigation asked them two questions. One is, why are you charging Americans 10, 15, 20 times more than you are overseas? And the second is, why are there only four major manufacturers of inhalers? They've been around since the 1950s. Certainly their patents must have expired, and there should be now generic competition unless they're gaming the system. Well, we launched our investigation in January, and by March, 3 of the 4 inhaler manufacturers came to our committee, came to us and said, we are voluntarily going to lower the out-of-pocket cost for Americans to no more than $35 per month out of pocket. And we know, because we're tracking it closely, that they're doing that. And that is, we didn't even have to pass a law. It was just a matter of heightened scrutiny and making the case that, that people who needed these devices in order to breathe needed to be able to afford them.
Well, so you mentioned how healthcare was in, the core of the fire in the belly, so to speak, the impetus for you getting into public life. And it also spills over into some of the other votes. So we mentioned the Affordable Care Act itself, which came within one vote of being taken away in the last administration. So if, who knows what's going to happen in November, that may be a fight to keep it again, or do you think it's pretty well established at this point?
Um, I think that Donald Trump is serious when he says he would like to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And I think my opponent, Eric Hovde, is serious when he says he wants to overturn the Affordable Care Act. We must be vigilant. I mean, in many ways, you're right that it is now a well-established program. But the idea that there are still folks who want to go after it, and if they come into power, I take them at their word. So you can say that healthcare, among many other issues, are on the ballot this November.
And so, continuing with that theme of how healthcare emanates into other issues, let's take up the border, because that's an issue that one party seems to talk quite a bit about, but yet we had a bipartisan bill that would have helped in that area tremendously. And I mentioned
Yes.
its connection to healthcare is obviously because of fentanyl. So why don't you expound on that and why you
Yes.
were in favor of trying to shore up our border?
Right. So the scourge of fentanyl is very dramatic, and Wisconsin in the last couple of years has lost 1,400 people per year to overdoses of fentanyl and other opioids and other drugs. I believe we have to take an all hands on deck approach to the fight against fentanyl. We were successful in passing one bill called Fend Off Fentanyl. The Fend Off Fentanyl Act looks at the entire supply chain and goes after it, starting with getting tougher on China, which has companies that are producing the precursor chemicals that are then going to Mexico, where the drug cartels are pressing pills. We have to also go after the pill presses, which are produced in China and sent into Mexico. And then we have to have a much better way of detecting fentanyl when it comes through ports of entry. Um, the folks who are in the know about how it gets into the country say 90% of fentanyl comes in through the regulated ports of entry. However, we don't have the technology deployed to the border that we need to be able to detect more of the drugs as they come through. Um, that step could have been taken had we passed the bipartisan border security bill. And I hope we will get right back to it as soon as the election is over. But as most people know who followed the development of that bill and then the defeat of that bill, it was partisan calls from Donald Trump saying, I want the crisis to continue on the border, the chaos to continue on the border, so it can help me in my election. And that is not a reason to tank legislation. But let me tell you a little bit about what that strong border bill contains. Not only does it contain over 1,000 new US Border Patrol officers and agents, but it would deploy technology that's capable of screening the vehicles that come through without opening them up and taking everything out. Currently, that's pretty much what happens, and it's you can only do a random sample, right? And so if you think if you're an air traveler, you go to the airport and you put your bag through a scanner, and the person operating the equipment can see inside without opening it. That's exactly what we have to do and deploy to the southern border. This technology exists, but we are going to have to authorize it and get it and pay for it and get it there. The other thing that the border security bill does is it brings order to the asylum process. So right now, it can take years for an asylum case to come before an immigration judge. It should take months, not years. And this bill would achieve that by hiring a lot more immigration judges to handle these cases, and again, restore order to our southern border.
In doing my research for this interview, I saw on your website you also tout, and that's what we ask incumbents, because basically you're asking to be sent back to a job you've already had for 12 years. And so I ask every office holder, what are the things that you're most proud of? And it's obvious also your support of veterans, that you, and that's a key point, is providing them with appropriate health care. Is that right?
Absolutely. So we passed a bill called the PACT Act, which greatly expands, in fact, is the largest expansion of healthcare for veterans by including so many who were exposed to toxins and burn pits and other things during their service to their country. It looks back all the way to Vietnam, where we have recognized exposure to Agent Orange produces detrimental health outcomes. But we only at first granted that recognition to those who had boots on the ground in Vietnam. But we didn't recognize those who were exposed in other locations around the world, including Navy veterans who were on ships where the Agent Orange was actually being brought to uh, uh, Vietnam. But recent generations of veterans in Afghanistan and Iraq and in the Gulf War and Kuwait were exposed to toxins that are producing very negative health outcomes. And now they can all get their health care at the VA, and they can also have disability recognition if their health has been impacted because of those exposures. I think when people don the uniform and take the oath, there's a sacred promise involved, and the PACT Act helped us keep that promise.
Okay. So, what are some of the other issues that might separate you and your opponent? Anybody who's on Facebook, and it tends to be older folks, other forms of social media for the younger ones. But so I happen to be on Facebook, and I see the ads. Both sides painting the other rather extreme. So, what do you feel is something that's a legitimate difference between the two of you?
Yes, well, I already mentioned healthcare and that he would want to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Certainly after the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade, and my opponent cheered. He celebrated the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And I think he must own the chaos that has ensued. I think that when you don't have those protections at the federal level, I think that we've seen in Wisconsin, which has a criminal abortion ban that was passed in 1849. You've heard harrowing stories of people who have crises in their pregnancies and they're not able to get care in Wisconsin. They're having to travel to neighboring states or endure life-threatening consequences. And I am the lead author in the United States Senate of a bill called the Women's Health Protection Act, which would restore Roe by putting it in our federal statutes and take the additional steps of telling states like Wisconsin and Texas and Florida and the others that are passing bans and 4-week bans, 6-week bans, preventing travel out of state. Tell states that they can't pass laws at the state level that would interfere with Roe v. Wade once we've codified it. So that's the bill that I lead, and it's going to be something that I work very hard to pass in the next Congress, because there's chaos and harm going on in the wake of the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade.
Imagine that, another healthcare bill, huh?
Yes,
So, yes,
yes.
I'm hearing the theme continue, but I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were going to go to a second issue.
Well, again, will have some tangent with healthcare, but being raised by my grandparents, I saw Social Security and Medicare in action at a much earlier age than most people do. And I know what a big difference those programs made in my grandparents' lives as they retired. And my opponent has talked about increasing the retirement age and going after entitlement programs. And I think of Social Security and Medicare as earned benefits. We pay in as we work throughout our lives, but I'll fight to protect those while my opponent will fight to cut those programs, all so that he can support a $4 trillion tax cut that goes disproportionately to the wealthy and big corporations. And I think that's just another defining difference between, I'm fighting for Wisconsinites every day. And I don't own a $3 billion bank like my opponent does. And I think I'm much more in touch with the challenges, the things that Wisconsinites tell me about when I travel the state extensively.
What are you hearing out there in that regard? Because I know that you were campaigning earlier today. We're taping this on the evening of Monday, first Monday of September, Labor Day. So what have you heard, whether it's today or in the past few weeks and months?
Oh my gosh, I think that people are still concerned about the high price of things. And feel, especially at the grocery store, and people are very focused. When your life depends upon it, the high cost of prescriptions even competes with the grocery bill for some families. And so definitely people want me working on lowering prices. I'm hearing a lot these days about the lack of available childcare for working parents. And a lot of childcare centers closed during the pandemic and didn't make it to open up again afterwards. So there's a scarcity there. The prices are very high, and it's making parents need to choose between returning to the workforce or staying home and not participating in the workforce. So it's actually an issue that I work very much, that I focus very much on, and also will tell you more needs to be done and active there too. But I chair a committee a subcommittee in the Appropriations Committee that funds the Child Care Block Grant, which is how states and counties help people subsidize their care if they can't afford it, but really need to get back to work. They can help with a stipend in order to cover part or all of the child care tuition. But we also want to be focused on child care workers. And on Labor Day, it's probably the right time to say that those workers are generally underpaid, very few benefits, and many leave the field that they've always dreamed of working in order to maybe take a job at the Quick Trip that will pay more and will allow them to have a more comfortable life. But we got to fix the wages that childcare workers are getting, and also make it more affordable for more to be, to feel that their child is in a safe situation while they go to work.
So yeah, I mean, I think in the past, tax credits have been, and I remember my wife and I, when we were younger and had kids in that age range, we were paying something like $500 a month for daycare. Now it's not uncommon. Young families are spending $2,000, $2,500, or even $3,000 a month just on that. So how do you do that? How do you make something more affordable yet pay the workers that perform those services more money?
Yeah, so we have a couple of bills out there that would make some significant reforms. I think one thing I might say is I recognize that free market isn't really working in the childcare arena. Free market works really well in some other arenas, but this one just doesn't seem to be working. And so one of the things you could do is, you have a child care center where people are paid a decent wage, there's benefits, people have the training, and it's high quality, and you price out what the tuition per child would be. And then on the parent side, you say, what's your income? And maybe we say you shouldn't have to spend more than 7% or 10% of your income on childcare. And then you could have a state-federal partnership that fills the gap between the true cost of the childcare with good paying jobs there and benefits, and the 7% or whatever that percent is that the parent can afford to pay. And then the state and federal government try to make up the difference. So that would be one of the approaches that I would take.
Excellent. Well, you can't get any more domestic than in domestic policy than stuff in the home that makes a difference around the kitchen table, like childcare costs. But I do want to focus, with the few minutes we have remaining, give us examples of foreign policy and things. Obviously, the border is, impacts our transborder trade and everything. But how would you? What would you anticipate doing to work and helping out in that regard, for whether it's, I think, some work that you've done for Central America and so forth, but.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example that that was actually inspired in part by my time in Wausau, many visits. There's a very great Hmong community in Wausau and in the surrounding areas. In fact, Wisconsin is third among states with regard to the number of Hmong residents and citizens we have. And that interested me in that region. I had the honor of traveling on an official delegation a couple years ago to Vietnam and learning about our efforts to address what they call the legacy of war. Address the continued Agent Orange contamination in Vietnam, but also the issue of unexploded ordnance and landmines that exist throughout the region in Vietnam and in Laos and in Cambodia, the homelands of the Hmong Wisconsinites that we have. And so one example is I have a bipartisan measure. We've passed it in the past. We want to renew it to fund some of the international nonprofits, non-governmental organizations that go and demine and detonate unexploded ordnance, so that people in villages across that region can garden and use the land agriculturally and feel safe that they're not going to be injured or killed by unexploded ordnance in rice fields or in other fields.
Okay. What about Ukraine, the war in Ukraine? Where do you stand on that? Would you want to help end the war by ending our support of Ukraine, or what would you do?
No, I want to help end the war by furthering our support of Ukraine. So let me just say that the illegal invasion by Vladimir Putin and Russia into Ukraine, a democracy, really, in my mind, does represent the battle between democracy and dictatorship. And the Western world has risen to Ukraine's defense, and we play a vital part of that. But I will say, I don't want endless war, and wars usually end in a political settlement, a diplomatic settlement. And so I think what has to happen is they have to be in a position where both can come to the table and resolve. And I think that the period of time where U.S. support fell off gave Russia the chance for huge inroads. And that meant they weren't going to be at the negotiating table anytime soon. I think we have to make sure that Russia knows that we're going to stand with democracies, that we're going to make sure that we continue to rally around Ukraine. And hopefully that will bring us to a point where there can be a negotiated settlement in the hopefully near future.
Well, the Ukraine war, along with tensions in the Middle East, have added to, get gas where it was up over $3 a gallon. Some would say part of that is if the United States was more energy independent, then those foreign events would have less of an impact on gasoline prices and oil prices, which affects plastics and everything else. So what's your feelings regarding that energy independence? Do you think there are areas that we can increase both conventional and then alternative energy sources?
Well, the Inflation Reduction Act, we talked about some of the healthcare provisions in that act, but it was the most significant energy and response to climate change of any nation ever. The idea is that over the series of a decade, that we pivot from fossil fuels to renewable and clean energy. And there are very robust incentives for private sector development in those areas. And implementing this measure, which isn't just, just pass it and walk away, it's going to take many years to make that pivot, but it's something that we are seeing create a lot of good paying jobs. And energy developers, both the large utilities as well as smaller businesses, are very excited about the opportunity we have to really lead the world. I want to take credit, as I like to do, for the Buy America provisions that were included in the Inflation Reduction Act. So it gives industry the incentives to make those components here in the USA, rather than relying on solar related products from overseas, particularly from China. And we should be in the lead in this pivot to clean and renewable energy. It's creating already jobs in Wisconsin. We have 2 companies that I know of who are making EV charging stations and adding jobs to do that. They saw this as a great place to get involved. And so I am always a huge proponent of Buy America policies when we're spending taxpayer dollars. I want them to stay here in the US rather than go overseas. And it's about job creation and good paying jobs.
All right. Well, I'm sorry we have run out of time. We could talk for another half hour. I really appreciate your time. Where can folks find your views and find out more about where you stand on other issues?
Yes. So since we're talking about campaigns, people can go to my campaign website at tammybaldwin.com. From that site, you can also follow me on other social mediums. I will also say, as a sitting U.S. Senator, I also have a website that you can look at that is maintained by my Senate office, which doesn't deal with the campaign at all, but deals with a lot of the press releases we're putting out and the committees that I serve on. And so it's another great vehicle for people wanting to get further information about me and the issues.
Okay, very good. Senator, happy Labor Day. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I want to say to our viewers, thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. Make sure you read up on all the candidates and make sure you get out there and vote in November. Have a great day.